Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Science Channel, where tonight we drift gently into the quiet, mysterious, and ancient world of glaciers, those slow-moving rivers of ice that have shaped our planet with extraordinary patience, subtlety, and strength for hundreds of thousands of years, carrying within them memories of vanished landscapes, forgotten atmospheres, and long-lost climates that existed far before humans ever walked the earth, their deep blue layers preserving secrets in cold, shimmering silence as light dances across their surfaces and cold air pools at their edges like the breath of another time. And as we wander into this frozen world, we discover hidden landscapes buried beneath the ice, silent mountain ranges completely entombed for millennia, their peaks, ridges, and valleys buried under thick sheets of ice that smooth their sharp edges while still subtly shaping the way the ice flows above them, creating soft humps on the glacier's surface that mirror towering peaks thousands of feet below, where meltwater streams quietly navigate around buried ridgelines to feed secret subglacial lakes that have never felt the warmth of the sun, forming isolated ecosystems untouched for tens of thousands of years, all lying hidden until modern radar instruments revealed these dramatic, unseen worlds. Some glaciers grow so incredibly clear that they resemble sheets of frozen glass, where layers of snow compress over centuries until nearly every air bubble has been squeezed out, leaving behind transparent, luminous ice that reveals trapped stones, ancient leaves, and tiny pockets of older ice suspended like delicate sculptures inside a vast, frozen crystal. Their clarity telling scientists that these layers have endured immense pressure and steady, orderly growth deep within the glacier, transforming fluffy snowflakes into dense, glowing blue ice whose color deepens with purity and thickness, absorbing reds and yellows from sunlight until only a rich blue hue remains, especially in deep crevasses or compressed ice walls where sapphire tones tell a long story of quiet accumulation, cold seasons, and centuries of undisturbed compression. Deep within these icy layers, tiny bubbles of ancient air remain sealed like microscopic time capsules capturing atmospheres from thousands of years ago, air that once blew across prehistoric forests, oceans, and plains, swirling around creatures that no longer exist, drifting through storms and silent mornings long before human history began. And by drilling deep into glaciers and retrieving cylindrical ice cores, researchers can read this frozen archive like pages of a book by measuring carbon dioxide, methane, and other atmospheric markers that reveal how Earth's climate shifted across ice ages and warming periods, each layer a chapter of global history stacked patiently atop the next. Glaciers, though seemingly frozen in place, are constantly moving as slow rivers of solid ice, flowing outward under their own immense weight as individual ice crystals deform and slide past one another, causing the entire mass to creep forward day after day even through the darkest winters, carrying with them long dark stripes of debris called moraines that trace the path the ice has followed for decades or centuries. And stakes driven into the surface do not remain where they are placed but drift downslope, marking the glacier's steady migration. In certain conditions, glaciers even appear to flow uphill, not by defying gravity but by responding to pressure differences deep within the ice. When ice is thick and heavy, pressure at the base can force ice to move toward regions where resistance is lower, even if that path requires climbing over a buried rise. A process aided by meltwater that lubricates the bed beneath and allows the glacier to quietly climb over obstacles hidden from view. Though glaciers seem silent, they produce thunderous, echoing booms as crevasses tear open or blocks of ice grind violently against one another when stress builds beyond what the brittle upper layers can withstand, sending cracks, rumbles, and low growls across frozen valleys, forming a hidden symphony of internal movement that sensitive instruments can detect even when human ears cannot. Each sound marking a moment when the glacier reshaped itself in response to shifting forces. As glaciers move, they carve valleys with extraordinary strength, grinding bedrock with rocks frozen into their base, smoothing some surfaces into polished stone while plucking huge boulders from cliffs and carving deep, dramatic troughs that evolve over thousands of years. And over repeated cycles of glacial advance and retreat, entire landscapes are sculpted into U-shaped valleys, fjords, cirques, and broad basins that later fill with lakes, forests, or rich soil for new ecosystems. Glaciers also create unique forms like drumlins, long streamlined hills shaped beneath moving ice, and moraines, ridges of rock and dirt left behind when the ice melts, marking the glacier's slow breathing across time. Beneath some glaciers lie vast networks of subglacial rivers, caves, lakes, and channels, flowing in total darkness as meltwater finds its way along the base, carving out spaces large enough to walk through yet never touched by sunlight. And in these places, the water can remain liquid even in extreme cold due to pressure and geothermal heat rising from Earth's interior. These hidden rivers sometimes surge suddenly in events known as jokuhalops, glacial outburst floods, that release enormous volumes of water, reshaping entire regions in hours. Some glaciers surge unpredictably, moving far faster than normal for short periods, racing forward dramatically as internal water pressure builds or basal friction decreases, causing the glacier to lurch down valley at speeds that defy its normally slow nature, transporting debris and ice in astonishing bursts of motion. Glaciers also influence global sea level as they melt or grow. During ice ages, vast sheets of ice lock away enormous amounts of water, lowering sea levels worldwide. And when those ice sheets melt, seas rise again, altering coastlines, creating bays and inlets, and flooding low-lying plains that once stretched far beyond present-day shores, showing how intimately glaciers are connected to life everywhere on Earth. In polar regions, some glaciers extend over the ocean, forming immense ice shelves that float atop seawater while still anchored to land ice, acting as buttresses that slow the flow of glaciers behind them. When these shelves crack or weaken, the glaciers feeding them accelerate dramatically. The edges of these shelves often calve enormous icebergs, some the size of cities, drifting into cold ocean currents where they slowly melt and release ancient freshwater. Within these icy realms, life persists in remarkable forms. Cold-adapted algae coloring the surface with green, red, or purple blooms. Tiny organisms living inside pockets of brine within the ice. And extremophiles surviving in subglacial lakes sealed off for tens of thousands of years, providing clues to what life might look like in the icy oceans of moons like Europa or Enceladus. As we explore further, we find patterns etched into glacial surfaces, flow lines, meltwater channels, crevasses, cryoconite holes filled with dark dust and microorganisms, and seracs rising like frozen towers, all shaped by sunlight, temperature, pressure, and movement, shifting subtly with the seasons, catching the soft glow of morning light, or shimmering under pale polar skies. And as the wind blows across these frozen landscapes, it carries fine snow into swirling drifts that soften every edge, muffling sound until everything feels suspended in quiet, timeless stillness, where the glacier's slow breathing becomes almost a lullaby. These frozen giants remind us that Earth's history is written not only in rocks and fossils but also in ice, in layers that capture whispers of ancient storms, long winters, quiet snowfalls, and warm periods that came and went before any human ever wondered at the sky. They show us the power of patience, the beauty of gradual change, and the resilience of the natural world. And as you settle into this journey, allowing your body to soften and your mind to rest, the glacier's story becomes a gentle companion, a reminder that even the slowest forces can shape mountains, guide rivers, and preserve memories older than time as we feel it, offering a calming and endless landscape for your imagination to wander while you drift toward peaceful sleep. The combined effect of glacial erosion can be enormous as entire valley systems are transformed from narrow, winding river channels into sweeping corridors framed by towering slopes carved patiently over millennia. And in many places lakes form where the glacier has overdeepened portions of the valley floor, leaving depressions ready to fill with meltwater once the ice retreats. While each curve of the landscape bears the subtle imprint of this hidden sculpting, worn into stone by the steady, relentless work of moving ice that grinds, plucks, and shapes everything in its path. And some glaciers even float on the ocean where thick bodies of ice extend outward from land to hover above the sea, creating enormous ice shelves or floating tongues whose grounded portions hold upstream ice in place while the floating sections interact directly with the ocean, allowing seawater to flow into hidden cavities beneath the shelf and melt it from below in intricate patterns shaped by currents and temperature gradients. And above these shelves large rifts open slowly through the ice until, eventually, immense tabular icebergs break free and drift into open waters, carrying with them ancient ice packed with air bubbles and compressed snowfall layers that preserve environmental history. all while this floating extension influences how the glacier behind it flows because the ice shelf acts like a stabilizing brace resisting the pull of gravity on inland ice, meaning that changes in the shelf's thickness or reach can alter the speed at which interior ice moves toward the sea, connecting snowfall far inland to distant ocean environments in a delicate chain of cause and effect. Some glaciers even generate their own winds as they're resting over high, cold ice fields becomes extremely dense and chilled, and when night falls or clear skies allow heat to radiate into space, that heavy air begins sliding downslope along the glacier's surface, gathering strength as it descends into valleys and forming steady, very cold katabatic winds known to local communities in glaciated regions. Winds that sweep through valleys carrying fine snow and ice crystals, creating distinct bands of colder air that influence weather, clear clouds from certain slopes while piling them against others, shape drifting snow patterns, and affect how plants and animals survive at the edge of the glacier's domain. And sensitive instruments reveal that these air currents are guided not just by gravity but also by the contours of the ice surrounding mountains, and the contrast between cold glacial surfaces and warmer ground below, forming a subtle but powerful climate engineered entirely by frozen water. Glaciers can also hide volcanic heat beneath their surfaces, because in certain ice-covered regions volcanic systems continue to pulse with energy even though everything above appears silent and unmoving, and the thick ice acts as a heavy insulating blanket trapping geothermal heat so that it melts the underside of the glacier, creating pockets of subglacial water that pool and flow in total darkness, sometimes forming entire networks of lakes where volcanic warmth keeps the water liquid all year. And this hidden heat alters the glacier's flow by reducing friction along the bed, allowing ice to slide more easily over bedrock, while steam and gases rise through cracks in the ice, occasionally triggering explosive interactions between molten rock and water in extremely rare but dramatic events, reminding us that what appears to be a peaceful frozen plateau may be shaped by tremendous geological forces working far beneath the surface where fire persists under a world of ice. Some glaciers surge forward suddenly, even though most advance slowly and predictably. These surges represent dramatic episodes when movement accelerates far beyond the glacier's usual pace, sending it racing forward many times faster for months or years at a time as pressure changes or meltwater buildup disrupts the delicate balance maintaining steady flow. And once that balance shifts, the ice slides more freely over its bed. Crevasses open with startling speed, ice folds buckle and stretch, and entire sections lurch ahead before the glacier eventually slows and settles back into a calmer rhythm, leaving behind chaotic ridges of debris and freshly carved channels that testify to this sudden burst of energy. And these rare accelerations remain one of the most intriguing mysteries in glaciology, revealing how swiftly ice can respond to hidden internal changes. Some glaciers even glow with soft light from within, because under certain conditions their interiors appear to emit a gentle radiance produced not by heat or biology but by the way dense, pure ice scatters and diffuses sunlight entering through cracks or thin surface layers. Once inside, light travels surprisingly far, bouncing around within ice crystals and filtering into deeper layers while brighter wavelengths fade and a rich blue glow remains. And on overcast days the effect can be even stronger as diffuse light spreads smoothly into surface layers, revealing hidden textures, compressed bands of ancient snow, and delicate patterns frozen across centuries, so that stepping into a safe ice cave may feel like entering a lantern of frozen light. Glaciers hold most of Earth's fresh water, storing snowfalls accumulated over countless winters in deep layers that descend far below the surface. And if all this locked-away water were released at once, global sea levels would rise dramatically, proving that even small changes in glacial mass influence ocean basins and coastlines. Meltwater eventually returns to the environment, feeding rivers and lakes that support human communities, entire ecosystems, and vast watersheds, moderating seasonal flows and stabilizing water supplies, making glaciers guardians of planetary moisture whose changes reshape the water balance of Earth and link remote frozen heights to distant river deltas and coastal shores. Some glaciers move faster than people expect, because although they appear motionless, some advance several feet per day through internal deformation, basal sliding, and the accumulation of new snow at high elevations, and when meltwater trickles downward to the glacier's base, it lubricates the contact between ice and rock, allowing faster sliding and accelerating surface movement. Especially during warm summers or periods of heavy snowfall, causing crevasses to widen, surface features to migrate downslope more quickly, and the glacier's front to cave more frequently, demonstrating how dynamic and responsive glacial ice can be when conditions align. Certain glaciers cave icebergs taller than buildings as enormous blocks break away from towering ice cliffs and crash into the sea, producing thunderous splashes and sending waves rolling across fjords, with each iceberg carrying intricate bands of compressed and ancient snowfalls that reveal the glacier's history. And these colossal fragments, which can rise hundreds of feet above the waterline, serve as powerful reminders of the immense scale of glacial forces and the constant exchange between ice and ocean. Glaciers also leave behind giant sculpted landscapes as they advance and retreat, carve, grind, and mold terrain across continents, pressing stones into the ground to gouge grooves, polishing bedrock until it gleams, creating steep cliffs where ice has plucked away large blocks, deepening old river channels into broad depressions, and depositing ridges of moraine, long arcs of stones and soil carried from distant origins, while post-glacial lakes form in hollows and rolling hills appear where mixed sediments accumulate, and over time plants and animals colonize these transformed surfaces, building ecosystems atop ground once hidden beneath frozen sheets, leaving marks so enduring that they outlast the glaciers responsible. Some glaciers form mysterious meltwater tunnels beneath their ice where intricate channels emerge as pressure forces meltwater to carve winding paths through the glacier's base and interior, stretching for miles and carrying water at astonishing speeds, constantly expanding or shrinking as melting or flowing ice reshapes them, and during warm seasons these tunnels may link to surface streams that plunge into deep crevasses, vanishing into darkness, while mapping reveals spiraling chambers and unexpected intersections in this hidden plumbing system that tells a story of temperature, pressure, and water flow in a world without light. Glaciers can also unleash powerful outburst floods when water builds up behind natural ice dams or within glacial basins, and when pressure becomes too great, the barrier fails suddenly, releasing immense volumes of water in catastrophic torrents capable of reshaping valleys and carrying enormous boulders far downstream. And these floods show how even silent, steady glaciers can produce some of the most dramatic natural events on Earth. These events send torrents of water, ice blocks, and sediment rushing downstream with immense force, reshaping the land in ways that remind us how powerful and unpredictable glacial environments can be. Because when a glacier releases water that has been locked away within its hidden chambers, the surge moves like a living force through the valleys, sweeping away vegetation, carving new paths, and altering river courses within mere hours, often leaving behind ruined forests, scattered boulders, and rearranged landscapes that reveal the immense energy held inside frozen worlds. And despite decades of study, researchers still struggle to predict the exact timing of such outburst floods because the internal structure of a glacier shifts silently and without warning, trapping water in hidden pockets and releasing it when pressure builds to a breaking point. And so scientists must examine subtle clues, patterns of melting, snow accumulation, and the faint movements of internal meltwater, to better understand when these floods might burst forth. Yet the darkness inside the ice remains a mystery that makes precise forecasting difficult. And once such a rush has passed, the land that remains carries the signature of transformation. Fresh channels cut deep into the earth, new layers of silt and stones spread across long plains, and winding paths where old riverbeds once lay, all acting as reminders of the immense power stored within frozen environments where solid ice can hold back vast reservoirs until a moment of sudden release. In the same frozen world, some glaciers hold more than water and pressure. They preserve ancient creatures in perfect stillness, locking away bodies before decay has even begun, because in extremely cold conditions, animals that perish near glaciers can become encased in ice within hours, and over time layers of snowfall bury them deeper, sealing them away from warmth, oxygen, and bacterial activity, creating a natural vault where skin, fur, bones, and even soft tissues remain intact for thousands of years. And when the glacier later melts or shifts, these frozen beings may return to the surface almost unchanged, appearing as though they had been sleeping beneath the ice rather than lost to time, and scientists flock to such discoveries to study the ecosystems of the past, learn how species migrated across ancient landscapes, and explore environmental conditions that shaped life during eras long before humans kept records. So each preserved organism becomes a messenger from a forgotten chapter of the Earth, connecting modern researchers to distant ages when climates and habitats were drastically different from the ones we know today. Even beyond the creatures within them, glaciers shape the very bones of the planet, grinding mountains into powder as enormous bodies of ice move with relentless force, pressing stones into the bedrock beneath them and dragging the rocks like countless heavy blades that scrape the surface again and again over centuries, breaking larger fragments into smaller ones, and crushing those pieces into an even finer material known as rock flour. A pale silky powder that travels with meltwater into rivers and lakes, giving them the cloudy turquoise color often seen in glacial lakes, because the tiny particles scatter sunlight in a unique way, and the process demonstrates how even the tallest peaks, symbols of permanence, can be worn down grain by grain under the slow but unstoppable pressure of moving ice, creating valleys smoother and deeper, shaping cliffs with polished faces, and carving entire regions over cycles of advance and retreat until the mountains themselves reveal the story of countless ages of glacial movement written over their surfaces. Some glaciers add another layer to their mysterious existence. They sing. Within their cold walls, delicate high-pitched tones rise and fade, drifting through icy chambers like the faint music of a frozen cathedral. And these sounds come from tiny fractures opening and closing within the ice, from pressurized meltwater pushing through narrow channels and creating soft whistles, and from the shifting of ice crystals as temperatures fluctuate, each movement producing vibrations that travel through the glacier's frozen body. And when conditions are just right, all these subtle sources combine into a shimmering soundscape that locals sometimes describe as ethereal singing. And although human ears detect only a portion of this acoustic activity, sensitive instruments placed on the surface record a rich chorus of pitches, some sharp and brief, others long and haunting, revealing hidden details about the glacier's internal structure, pressure levels, and flow patterns, reminding us that glaciers are not silent, lifeless masses but active, dynamic bodies that hold a subtle musical life shaped by constant movement. The deeper inside a glacier one goes, the older its story becomes, because glacial ice can be far older than human civilization, formed from layers of snow that fell long before cities existed, before languages developed, and even before agriculture transformed human societies. And as snow accumulated year after year, the weight compressed it into ice that preserved dust from volcanic eruptions, particles from ancient storms, and tiny bubbles of air that trapped the atmosphere of distant ages. So scientists drill long cylinders called ice cores from the deepest layers and examine them with precision, reading the frozen record of past climates, identifying changes in temperature patterns, tracking carbon levels from eras we could never otherwise reach, and discovering the rhythms of the planet from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Making the glacier a vast archive where history is measured not by centuries, but by enormous stretches of time, preserved with exceptional clarity within the frozen depths. Many glaciers extend their influence far beyond their icy boundaries because meltwater that emerges from beneath them flows into streams that grow into rivers traveling across entire continents, supporting ecosystems, wildlife, and human communities along the way. And as the glacier melts during warmer months, cold and clear water trickles from beneath the ice, gathering strength as it descends through valleys and channels, combining into rivers that cross forests, plains, and farmlands before reaching distant regions, making glacial melt not just a local phenomenon but a life source for millions, shaping agriculture cycles, sustaining hydropower systems, and influencing the availability of water far from the glacier's original location, and even after the meltwater leaves the shadow of its frozen birthplace. It continues to connect distant landscapes in an intricate network of life that depends on the rhythms of ice and sun. And yet glaciers appear in places where one might least expect them, hidden inside desert mountains where heat and dryness dominate the landscape, because in high-altitude deserts certain sheltered ravines, deep cirques, and shaded cliffs create microclimates where snow can accumulate over time and slowly transform into ice. protected from sunlight by steep stone walls and insulated by cold air that sinks and becomes trapped in narrow pockets, and while the surrounding land may be scorching. During the day, these isolated glacial remnants endure, surviving long periods of dryness and maintaining frozen conditions even in environments that seem far too warm or arid to support ice, offering scientists rare opportunities to study how ice can persist in extreme climates and how small, sheltered environments can preserve cold refuges despite the harshness of the broader surroundings. These desert glaciers highlight the complex relationship between geography, climate, and time, proving that ice can survive where logic says it shouldn't, and demonstrating the resilience and adaptability of glacial systems in ways that broaden our understanding of the frozen world. Meanwhile, glacial landscapes continue to evolve with each passing year as meltwater shapes new channels, ancient ice reveals long-buried secrets, and powerful forces grind mountains and valleys into new forms, creating environments where everything from the color of a lake to the path of a river tells a story of ice at work. The dynamic nature of glaciers reminds us that they are not static relics of the past but active participants in Earth's changing climate system, influencing weather patterns, ocean levels, and ecological health across the globe. And within their icy depths lie the preserved traces of climates long vanished, creatures once thought lost forever, and geological transformations that span millennia. Every component of a glacier, its frozen walls, its hidden reservoirs, its grinding base, its singing vibrations, its ancient layers, its desert outposts, intertwines into a vast and powerful system that continues to sculpt the planet and preserve the memory of the Earth across time. And although glaciers seem distant, cold, and unchanging, they are in fact dynamic beings, shifting and reshaping both the land beneath them and the understanding we hold of our planet's deep history, offering a unique window into past worlds while influencing the present in countless ways that stretch far beyond their frozen boundaries. Glaciers are far more dynamic, powerful, and complex than they first appear, and their frozen surfaces hide worlds of movement, sound, pressure, and ancient memory deep within them, creating phenomena that can reshape landscapes, bend light, sculpt ice into forms beyond imagination, and preserve fragments of Earth's long history. On clear days, some glaciers create shimmering mirages as sunlight strikes their cold upper surfaces and meets pockets of warmer air rising from the surrounding ground, producing unusual distortions that ripple across the horizon like ghostly lakes or suspended ridges floating above the ice, bending light in ways that lift distant shapes, stretch cliffs into wavering walls, or make dark patches of rock appear as if they are melting into liquid. These illusions shift subtly as travelers approach, revealing the delicate balance of temperature layers and air density gradients that hover invisibly above the glacier's surface. But the seeming stillness of these icy giants is often broken by deep cracks that open with violent force, releasing explosive roars that roll across valley walls. Inside many glaciers, massive stress accumulates slowly as the heavy upper layers press downward, building tension until the brittle surface can no longer hold. When the ice finally fractures, the sound erupts in a fierce snap that expands into a long, rumbling growl, vibrating through the frozen structure and sending seismic signals that researchers can detect far away. Some crevasses open dramatically across the surface, revealing blue depths so steep they seem bottomless, while others occur out of sight within the glacier's core, shifting its internal architecture in sudden, unseen rearrangements. These cracks mark moments when ancient layers of compressed snow and buried ice realign themselves, continuing a cycle of strain, release, and forward motion that has shaped mountains and valleys for ages. During cold spells, waterfalls flowing around glacier edges or down steep cliffs can freeze mid-descent, transforming motion into a suspended sculpture of ice where sheets of frozen water hang like curtains shimmering in the sun, each layer built from repeated cycles of dripping, freezing, expanding, and thickening. These frozen waterfalls can form clear columns, frosted ridges, or delicate patterns shaped by wind, shade, and the rhythm of warming and cooling. When temperatures rise, they melt from within, collapsing in glittering shards that echo across the cliffs. Not all glaciers glide over solid bedrock. Some move atop layers of slippery, water-soaked mud that behave almost like liquid under immense pressure. This muddy layer deforms easily, shifting and squishing as the glacier moves, allowing even massive bodies of ice to slide faster than they would across rough terrain. Rocks carried within the ice plow through this soft sediment, leaving behind strange swirls, ridges, and deposits once the glacier retreats. The movement of these mud-based glaciers teaches scientists how changes in water content can alter the pace, pressure, and resilience of entire ice systems. Remarkably, some glaciers begin as nothing more than a stubborn patch of snow tucked into a shaded crevice where cold air accumulates and sunlight rarely reaches. When this patch survives summer after summer without melting, new layers of snow settle atop the old ones each winter, slowly compressing the lower layers into firn and eventually into ice. Over many years, gravity pulls the thickening mass downslope, carving tiny creases, gathering rocky debris, and forming meltwater channels. What starts as a simple remnant of winter grows into a self-sustaining glacier with its own flow, structure, and character. Within these growing bodies of ice, layer upon layer of ancient snow turns into a detailed archive of climate history. Each year's snowfall traps dust, chemicals, volcanic ash, and tiny air bubbles that contain the composition of ancient atmospheres. Deep within the ice, these layers record temperature changes, shifts in wind patterns, drought cycles, and the carbon dioxide levels of ages long past. Scientists drill deep cores into these frozen timelines, analyzing their trapped gases and chemical signatures to uncover clues about Earth's environmental shifts over thousands of years. The glacier becomes a silent historian, preserving environmental stories far beyond the reach of written human memory. On the surfaces of some high-altitude glaciers, sunlight, wind, and freezing air interact in rare combinations to create forests of delicate needle-ice spires rising from the ground. These thin, fragile formations grow when intense sunlight melts the surface slightly and the evaporating moisture refreezes into narrow ridges that sharpen into crystalline points. Their structure is so fragile and sharp that climbers often avoid stepping on them, as the spires can pierce fabric or crumble unexpectedly beneath their weight. These formations demonstrate the remarkable artistic power of nature when exposed to extremes of dryness, cold, and light. Large glaciers often span multiple climate zones as they travel down mountain ranges. Their highest reaches lie in freezing temperatures where snow accumulates faster than it melts, covering the landscape in thick drifts that appear untouched and pristine. As the glacier flows downward, it enters transitional zones where melting increases, revealing blue ice surfaces streaked with debris bands, cracks, and meltwater streams. Farther down, the glacier reaches valleys influenced by warm summers and variable weather, where water flows across the ice in channels, carving intricate paths. Despite these differences, the glacier remains one connected body, responding uniquely to the contrasting conditions that exist along its length. As glaciers advance and retreat over centuries, they carve deep basins into the Earth's crust. When these basins fill with meltwater, they become glacial lakes, brilliant turquoise, jade, or milky blue due to the presence of rock flowers suspended in the water. Some lakes form while the glacier is still present, trapped behind natural ice dams, while others emerge long after the glacier has melted away, leaving behind a landscape shaped entirely by frozen movement. These lakes support ecosystems adapted to cold, mineral-rich waters and become vital water sources for nearby communities. When massive ice sheets melt, the land beneath them rises slowly in a process called isostatic rebound. The enormous weight of the glacier compresses Earth's crust, and once that weight is removed, the land lifts gradually upward over hundreds or even thousands of years. Coastlines rise, ancient beaches appear far inland, and rivers change course as the land tilts and uplifts, revealing how glaciers shape the planet long after they vanish. Some glaciers are powerful enough to trap entire landscapes or ancient remains inside them, locking away plants, animals, and even pieces of long-lost ecosystems within layers of ice. When temperatures shift or the glacier retreats, these frozen time capsules reappear, astonishingly well preserved. Animals buried in cold, oxygen-poor ice can emerge thousands of years later with fur, skin, and sometimes even internal organs intact, offering scientists rare opportunities to study species that lived in vastly different climates. Ice also holds the microscopic remnants of pollen, bacteria, and atmospheric gases that reveal past weather cycles, volcanic eruptions, and atmospheric composition. This frozen preservation connects present-day researchers with worlds long gone. Glaciers grind mountains into powder as they move, pressing stones into bedrock with immense force and dragging them across the surface like blades that scrape, pulverize, and shatter rock into smaller fragments until eventually producing rock flour. Meltwater carries this fine sediment into rivers and lakes, giving them their distinctive cloudy or turquoise appearance. Over thousands of years, glaciers transform towering peaks into smooth valleys, reshape ridges, and sculpt entire landscapes with relentless, slow pressure. Some glaciers sing with faint high-pitched tones that drift through the air. These sounds come from tiny internal movements, ice crystals shifting, fractures opening and closing, or pressurized meltwater squeezing through narrow channels. Sensitive instruments capture this hidden soundscape, revealing that glaciers are constantly humming with subtle vibrations shaped entirely by their frozen inner workings. Other glaciers exist in the most unexpected places, such as high desert mountains where pockets of cold air settle into deep shadows. Even in regions known for heat and dryness, glaciers survive in sheltered cirques and ravines where sunlight rarely reaches and temperatures remain low enough for snow to accumulate slowly over decades. Their persistence in harsh environments helps scientists understand how microclimates can protect cold systems even as global temperatures rise. When warm air meets the cold environment around glaciers, unusual optical illusions appear above the ice, creating mirages that bend distant landscapes into surreal shapes. These shimmering distortions shift as observers move, revealing the constant interplay between sunlight, temperature layers, and the invisible motion of the atmosphere. Glaciers are far more than frozen rivers locked in silence. They are vast, dynamic, ever-moving worlds whose mysteries unfold slowly in shimmering air, cracking ice, and sculpted landscapes. And these monumental bodies of frozen water create mirages on clear days when sunlight strikes their cold surfaces and meets pockets of warmer air rising from nearby terrain, producing distortions that shimmer above the ice like floating illusions and bending light in ways that make distant ridges appear lifted, stretched, or rippling like water, confusing travelers who sometimes mistake these mirages for lakes or cliffs until movement reveals their shifting nature. And these optical illusions become delicate clues to the balance of temperature and air density above glaciers, revealing invisible motions of the atmosphere that play out quietly over frozen ground. Though glaciers often appear calm and unmoving, they can crack with tremendous vibrating roars when internal forces overwhelm the brittle surface layers, causing sudden fractures that burst outward as both sound and vibration, echoing along valley walls and sharp snaps that deepen into rumbling growls before fading back into silence. And these fractures, which often form deep crevasses or unseen internal breaks, leave behind signals captured by scientific instruments, telling researchers how ice shifts, stretches, and rearranges its internal structure as it flows downslope. During especially cold periods, some glaciers even create rare frozen waterfalls when meltwater that usually flows freely down steep cliffs freezes in mid-descent, forming shimmering sheets and curtains of suspended ice that hold flowing motion in still, crystalline form, developing delicate layered patterns shaped by temperature, sunlight, splash, and wind. And though these frozen waterfalls eventually melt or collapse, they offer brief glimpses of perfect balance between liquid motion and freezing air. Beneath some glaciers lies slippery mud instead of solid bedrock, a water-saturated, easily deformed sediment layer that permits heavy ice to slide more rapidly than it would over rock, supporting the glacier like a thick, shifting fluid while trapping and rearranging the stones carried by the ice and leaving unusual sediment patterns after the glacier retreats. Patterns that scientists study to understand how soft ground influences glacial speed, stability, and long-term behavior. Glaciers can even form from a single stubborn patch of snow that manages to survive summer after summer, accumulating new layers each winter until the weight compresses the older layers into firn and then into ice. And as the mass grows thicker and heavier, it begins to creep downslope, forming crevasses, collecting rocks, carving shallow channels, and slowly transforming from a simple remnant of winter into a functioning glacier with its own flow system, demonstrating how even the simplest beginnings can give rise to enormous frozen systems in the right conditions. Over thousands of years, glaciers also serve as remarkable archives of ancient climate shifts, preserving atmospheres of long-lost eras within layers of compressed snow that contain dust, pollen, chemical signatures, trapped gases, and subtle variations that reveal past temperatures, volcanic eruptions, wind patterns, and environmental transitions. And by drilling deep cores and examining the bubbles and particles preserved inside, scientists reconstruct climate patterns stretching beyond human memory, reading the planet's environmental history as though each layer were a page in an ancient, frozen book. On high-altitude glaciers, delicate needle ice structures grow in rare conditions when intense sunlight warms the surface just enough to melt it slightly before cold, dry air refreezes it through rapid evaporation, leaving behind tall, thin spires of ice that resemble crystalline forests pointing toward the sky, sharp enough to cut fabric and fragile enough to break under a climber's weight. Forming only under precise combinations of sunlight, dryness, and temperature. Large glaciers that stretch across multiple climate zones reveal dramatic contrasts along their lengths, beginning high in frigid mountaintops where accumulation exceeds melting, then flowing downward into milder zones marked by increased meltwater, and finally reaching valley floors where warmer summers shape bare blue ice crossed with debris bands. And these gradients give scientists a living laboratory to observe how a single glacier responds simultaneously to entirely different climates. From top to bottom, glaciers carve deep hollows that become vibrant lakes either while the glacier still exists or after it retreats. And these lakes often glow with turquoise or green hues due to finely ground rock flowers suspended in the water, supporting unique ecosystems adapted to cold, mineral-rich environments, and reminding viewers of the glacier's power long after the ice itself disappears. When massive glaciers melt after covering land for thousands of years, the Earth's crust, long compressed beneath the unimaginable weight, begins to rise again in a slow, steady process called isostatic rebound, causing coastlines to shift, river paths to change, and ancient shorelines to appear far above modern sea level, offering visible evidence of how ice reshapes continents not only through erosion, but through the slow release of pressure long after the ice is gone. Some glaciers trap entire forests beneath them as advancing ice sheets sweep over tree-filled valleys, burying roots, trunks, branches, and leaves under deep cold where decay virtually stops, and when the glacier melts centuries or millennia later, it reveals these preserved forests, giving scientists rare, intimate glimpses of ecosystems that existed before the ice advanced and allowing them to study ancient species, climates, and landscapes with remarkable clarity. In steep mountain chains, glaciers squeeze through narrow passes, deforming, folding, and stretching their ice to fit through constricted spaces, forming dramatic surface patterns that resemble frozen waves while scraping along rock walls and slowly widening the passages themselves over long periods, leaving behind polished surfaces and broadened channels that mark their stubborn movement. As glaciers move across uneven land, their flow often splits into multiple ice streams that behave like separate rivers within the same frozen mass, each influenced by bedrock shape, slope, thickness, and underlying conditions, and when these branches merge again, they create twisting folds, ridges, and patterns that reveal how the ice once diverged and reconverged, helping researchers better understand the mechanics of glacial motion. Surface tension and constant pulling create deep crevasses, narrow, dramatic openings that plunge into blue depths many stories below, sometimes wide enough to swallow buildings, sometimes hidden beneath thin snow bridges, and always serving as stark reminders of the immense forces acting within glaciers even when the surface looks deceptively smooth. In coastal regions, some glaciers flow all the way to the sea, forming towering tidewater fronts where ice meets ocean directly, calving enormous icebergs as waves carve and tides rise beneath the ice, while seawater melts the glacier from below and cold air shapes its upper layers, creating a dynamic environment that influences both the glacier's movement and the surrounding marine ecosystems. Beneath the ice, meltwater streams carve beautiful yet temporary ice tunnels whose roofs gradually harden into natural ice bridges that stretch across crevasses or valleys, glowing with translucent blues and whites as layers of snow accumulate overhead. And though these structures can hold great weight due to the density of glacier ice, they melt, collapse, and reshape with seasonal fluctuations. forming and disappearing like temporary sculptures shaped by water, cold, and time. Within the layered depths of glaciers, intense pressure sometimes forces lower layers upward when the ice encounters buried ridges or sudden changes in slope, folding the layers like pages in a book so that older ice rises on top of younger ice, revealing colorful stripes of compressed snowfall across cliffs and crevasse walls, stripes that act like a geological timeline of the glacier's movements, pressures, and past environmental conditions. Hidden beneath the seemingly solid surface of many glaciers, rivers of meltwater rush through dark channels carved by pressure and gravity, forming complex networks that can move with surprising speed, shifting as ice melts, refreezes, collapses, or slides, and these subglacial rivers influence the glacier's speed by lifting sections of ice or carving deeper channels in bedrock, creating a dynamic world that remains invisible to anyone standing above. Though many glaciers shrink in warming climates, a few exceptional ones continue to grow even as surrounding regions warm because of highly specific local conditions such as deep shade cast by towering cliffs, persistent cloud cover that shields them from sunlight, or strong winds that blow drifting snow into certain basins, causing snowfall accumulation to exceed melting despite broader climate trends. And these unusual glaciers serve as reminders that local geography can create microclimates, powerful enough to defy regional warming patterns. Together, all these wonders, mirages that shimmer in the cold air, cracks that roar through valleys, waterfalls frozen mid-motion, mudsliding glaciers, tiny snow patches transformed into great rivers of ice, ancient atmospheres preserved in layers, needle-sharp ice forests, multi-climate ice systems, turquoise lakes, rising coastlines, buried forests, squeezed mountain passes, branched ice streams, abyss-deep crevasses, tidewater cliffs, ice bridges, folded layers, hidden rivers, and the rare glaciers that grow against the odds, reveal the astonishing complexity and beauty of these frozen giants, showing that glaciers are not static monuments of ice but living, evolving, powerful forces shaping landscapes, preserving history, and illuminating the delicate balance of Earth's climate systems in every shimmering layer and every slow, persistent movement across the land. Glaciers are dynamic, powerful, and constantly changing forces that reshape landscapes, store ancient histories, and influence environments far beyond the frozen regions in which they form. And when they release sudden floods, these events send torrents of water, ice blocks, and sediment rushing downstream with immense force, carving out new paths and altering the land in a matter of hours, sweeping away vegetation, reshaping valleys, and shifting the courses of rivers. And because their internal structures can shift without warning, these floods often occur unpredictably even as researchers study melting patterns, water accumulation, and subsurface pressures in hopes of identifying subtle triggers in advance. Yet the hidden nature of the stored water makes forecasting extremely difficult, and when the surge finally passes, new landscapes remain in its wake, marked by freshly carved channels, rearranged boulders, and deposits of silt and stone, providing unmistakable reminders of the incredible energy stored within what appears, from the outside, to be a quiet, frozen world. In extremely cold environments, glaciers can also preserve ancient creatures with astonishing fidelity. When animals perish near or on the ice, they can become locked within the frozen mass before decay even begins, and as snowfall accumulates over centuries, the remains are slowly buried deeper and deeper, insulated from warmth and oxygen, suspended in a kind of natural time capsule where biological activity stops almost completely. And when a glacier eventually melts or shifts, these long-lost creatures may reappear looking remarkably unchanged despite the passing of thousands of years. Scientists study these preserved organisms to understand ancient ecosystems, migration patterns, climate conditions, and the interactions between species in eras vastly different from today, making each frozen specimen a messenger from a forgotten chapter of Earth's history. Glaciers also play a significant role in sculpting the land. As they move, they grind mountains into powder, pressing stones into bedrock with enormous force, dragging them across the ground like countless massive blades scraping the Earth's surface, fracturing larger fragments into smaller ones, and pulverizing those smaller pieces into even finer particles that form soft, pale rock flour. Meltwater carries this powder into rivers and lakes where it causes them to turn cloudy or turquoise, scattering sunlight in distinctive ways. This grinding process illustrates just how powerful moving ice can be. Mountain peaks that once towered high can be worn down grain by grain, valleys deepen and smooth, and even seemingly indestructible geological features yield to the persistent pressure of the glacier. Some glaciers even produce high-pitched sounds that resemble singing. Tiny fractures opening and closing release sharp notes. Pressurized meltwater whistling through narrow channels produces softer tones, and subtle shifts in ice crystals due to temperature changes vibrate through the frozen mass, combining into shimmering soundscapes that locals sometimes describe as a strange, icy music. Sensitive instruments record a rich chorus of pitches, many beyond the range of human hearing, each reflecting changes in temperature, internal stress, and pressure deep within the glacier. Glaciers also preserve deep records of ancient climates. Some ice is older than human civilization, with layers formed by snowfalls that predate cities, writing, or agriculture, reaching back into eras when Earth followed entirely different climatic rhythms. These layers contain dust from ancient volcanic eruptions, traces of long-lost storms, and microscopic bubbles of air that hold the atmosphere of ages long before any human existed. Scientists drill long cylinders of ice, core samples that serve as a frozen archive measured not in centuries but in tens of thousands of years, allowing them to reconstruct environmental conditions from the distant past. Meltwater from glaciers becomes the source of rivers that travel across continents. As the ice melts during warmer seasons, cold, clear streams trickle from beneath the glacier, gathering strength as they descend and combining to form rivers that cross plains, forests, and grasslands, supporting ecosystems and communities far downstream. These melt-fed rivers provide water for agriculture, hydropower, wildlife, and daily human needs, and their seasonal rhythms shape entire watersheds long after the water has left the shadow of the ice. Glaciers also exist in surprising places, such as desert mountains, where isolated masses of ice persist in deep shadows shielded from sunlight, forming in sheltered cirques where cold air sinks and remains trapped, allowing small pockets of ice to survive in environments that seem far too warm or dry for frozen landscapes. These hidden glaciers offer scientists opportunities to study survival strategies of ice in extreme conditions and the powerful effects of microclimates on long-term ice retention. In some regions, avalanches add large amounts of snow to certain glaciers faster than seasonal heat can melt it, enabling them to thicken and extend even during periods of regional warming. This behavior shows that glaciers respond not just to broad climate trends but also to local geography, wind patterns, and the redistribution of snow, reminding researchers of the complexity of glacial dynamics. Some glaciers even store fallen meteorites. In certain polar deserts, meteorites that land on the ice become frozen into the upper layers and transported gradually across the glacier until sublimation exposes them on blue ice fields, where they accumulate naturally over thousands of years. Scientists search these areas to recover rocks from asteroids, the Moon, and Mars, samples preserved in pristine condition by the protective cold of the glacier, offering rare and invaluable insights into the early solar system and the materials that formed planetary bodies. Glaciers can sculpt huge bowl-shaped cirques at their upper reaches, where ice grinds against mountain rock year after year, deepening and widening the basin, creating a steep-sided hollow that often remains shaded for much of the year, accumulating snow that feeds the glacier above it. When the glacier retreats, the cirque often becomes a pristine lake reflecting the cliffs that once supported the ice. Glaciers also grind massive boulders into smooth, rounded stones. As the ice drags rocks across the ground, the stones rub against each other and against the bedrock, softening sharp edges and polishing surfaces, leaving behind vast fields of smooth stones that act as geological records of glacial movement and pressure. Some glaciers glow blue under moonlight when dense, pure ice scatters incoming light, filtering out warmer colors and leaving behind an ethereal blue radiance that appears to emanate from within the glacier itself, shifting as the moon moves and creating a hauntingly beautiful nighttime landscape shaped by crystal structure and pale illumination. Certain glaciers move in rhythmic pulses rather than at constant speeds. Changes in meltwater pressure beneath the ice, fluctuations in snowfall, or internal structural shifts can accelerate and decelerate the glacier in repeating cycles, influencing crevasse patterns, surface features, and the amount of ice delivered to the glacier's front, revealing how sensitive glaciers are to subtle environmental changes. They also trap dust from distant continents. Fine particles carried by global winds settle onto the glacier, becoming locked into layers of snow that are buried and preserved over time, forming thin bands of foreign material within the ice. These layers may contain volcanic ash from eruptions on the other side of the planet or dust blown from faraway deserts, enabling scientists to trace atmospheric movements, storm patterns, and major historical climate events, turning the glacier into a global archive of environmental signals. In extremely high-altitude regions, some glaciers form tall ice spires called penitents, narrow, blade-like structures sculpted by intense sunlight that causes snow to sublimate rather than melt, deepening tiny depressions that grow into tall peaks pointing toward the sun, forming surreal frozen forests of pale blue blades that can tower above a human observer. Glaciers also create vast muddy outwash plains. As meltwater flows from the glacier's front, it carries sand, silt, gravel, and stones ground from the landscape, spreading them across broad, flat regions in networks of shifting braided streams that rearrange the terrain each season, building layer upon layer of sediment and connecting glacial meltwater to distant ecosystems. Some glaciers carry massive boulders called erratics, stones transported long distances atop or within the ice and deposited far from their original location when the glacier melts, sometimes left perched alone in fields or on hillsides completely unlike the rock from which they originated. These misplaced giants help researchers trace the former paths of glaciers and understand ancient ice movements across landscapes now free of snow. Glaciers also turn rock into the finest silt known as rock flour, ground into near-microscopic particles that remain suspended in meltwater, giving rivers and lakes their distinctive milky or turquoise appearance while revealing the immense, slow-moving power of ice to reshape whole regions grain by grain. All these elements, sudden floods, preserved creatures, grinding ice, ancient climate records, glowing moonlit surfaces, rhythmic pulses, desert-hidden ice, cosmic meteorites, blue ice fields, sculpted cirques, polished stones, shifting outwash plains, towering penitents, and far-traveled erratics, together form a portrait of glaciers as living, evolving systems. Complex archives of Earth's past and powerful architects of its landscapes, whose frozen bodies move, sing, erode, store, transport, reshape, and reveal in ways both subtle and dramatic, reminding us that even in their apparent stillness, glaciers are forces of endless change, connecting distant regions, bridging ancient eras with the present, and continually altering the world around them in ways both visible and hidden, vast and minute, immediate and timeless. Glaciers, those ancient rivers of compressed snow that flow with the patience of mountains, hold within them a world of extraordinary processes, mysteries, and interactions that reveal both the past and the ever-changing present of our planet. In many high and remote regions, glaciers receive far more snow than the surrounding climate alone can explain, as avalanches crash down from neighboring ridges and deposit massive loads of powder onto the ice, thickening the glacier even when nearby valleys experience warm seasons that melt exposed snowfields. These unusual accumulations remind scientists that glacier behavior depends not only on temperature but also on the specific shapes of mountains, the direction of winter storms, wind-driven redistribution of snow, and the subtle flows of air that channel snow into protected basins. Some glaciers even act as natural collectors of extraterrestrial debris, preserving meteorites that fall on polar ice and become frozen into the surface. As the ice slowly flows, sublimation removes the upper layers, leaving the meteorites concentrated on blue ice fields where researchers now search for rocks from asteroids, the Moon, and Mars, all perfectly preserved by the glacier's cold and dryness. In many mountainous landscapes, glaciers carve deep bowl-shaped hollows known as cirques, grinding their beds until steep rock walls and rounded floors develop, forming the birthplace of ice that survives year-round in shady cavities where winter snow layers accumulate, compress, and begin their slow descent downhill. When the glacier eventually retreats, these cirques often fill with water, becoming clear blue lakes that quietly reflect the cliffs that once sheltered the ice. As glaciers move, They drag along boulders, gravel, and finer sediments, and over centuries they grind large rocks into smooth, rounded stones whose polished surfaces reveal the intense pressure beneath the ice. In other areas, glaciers transport massive boulders known as erratics, carrying them across great distances before depositing them far from their original source, leaving isolated giants in unexpected locations where their presence becomes a key to reconstructing long-vanished paths of ice that once covered entire regions. Glacial ice can also glow an ethereal blue under moonlight, especially in places where it is pure, dense, and compact. The structure of the ice scatters sunlight and moonlight in such a way that warmer wavelengths are absorbed, while cooler wavelengths scatter back in shimmering shades of blue that shift subtly as the moon moves across the sky. Many glaciers display deep internal structures made of ancient snowfalls compressed into layered bands that twist like ribbons as the ice flows over uneven ground. Exposed in crevasses, melt tunnels, or fractured cliffs, these layers reveal the glacier's internal history, recording years of dust storms, volcanic eruptions, snowfall variations, and temperature changes that together form a frozen stratigraphy of climate. Even the flow of glaciers is rarely uniform, for some advance in rhythmic pulses driven by changes in meltwater pressure beneath the ice, shifts in the internal crystalline structure, or seasonal variations in snow accumulation. These pulses reshape crevasses, adjust the speed of the glacier's advance, and influence how much ice reaches the terminus each year. Glaciers also trap dust from deserts and volcanic eruptions thousands of miles away, incorporating the particles into snowy layers that gradually compress into ice and become thin dusty lines marking global atmospheric events, like pages in an ancient archive sealed within frozen walls. In the exceedingly dry and high regions of the world, glaciers can even form towering blade-like ice structures known as penitents, which emerge when intense sunlight causes snow to sublimate rather than melt, deepening depressions faster than surrounding areas until slender, jagged spires remain standing in fields of pale blue peaks, each one shaped delicately by sunlight, wind, and temperature. Meltwater streams emerging from glaciers often spread into wide outwash plains, building braided channels that constantly shift as they deposit loads of sand, silt, gravel, and stones ground from the glacier's bed. These plains expand year after year, linking the glacier to downstream ecosystems and leaving behind dynamic landscapes formed entirely by the steady release of sediment. When glaciers drag stones beneath them, they grind rock into an extremely fine powder known as rock flour, which turns meltwater streams brilliant shades of turquoise and carries nutrients into lakes and valleys where fertile soil eventually forms. This powder indicates intense glacial erosion and represents a direct mark of ice reshaping the land grain by grain over immense stretches of time. Deep within certain glaciers, alternating layers of ancient snowfall become compressed into distinct ice bands that fold gracefully as the glacier bends around obstacles, creating loops, arcs, and curves visible along crevasse walls, patterns that reveal the glacier's shifting pressures and movements. In steep mountain regions, glaciers may topple dramatically over cliffs, forming towering icefalls where blocks and pillars break apart in chaotic frozen cascades, constantly shifting and fracturing as the glacier pushes downward. The echoes of collapsing ice reveal the tension within this unstable terrain, illustrating how gravity forces frozen rivers into dramatic and dangerous shapes. Some glaciers hide entire networks of icy caves sculpted by meltwater flowing through cracks and tunnels, hollowing out sinuous chambers whose shimmering blue walls, arched ceilings, and flowing textures evolve constantly as water melts, refreezes, and shifts direction. These hidden spaces offer a rare glimpse into the glacier's interior world. Glaciers also record volcanic eruptions with astonishing precision. When ash falls onto snow, it becomes sealed into layers that eventually compress into dark lines inside the ice, marking specific eruptions and preserving evidence that helps scientists map the movement of atmospheric ash across continents. As glaciers retreat, the land beneath them often rises in a slow process known as isostatic rebound, reshaping coastlines, altering river paths, and influencing how the glacier's remaining ice flows across gradually changing terrain. This interplay reveals how ice and bedrock communicate across centuries. In certain regions, glaciers develop slow spiraling patterns as one side moves slightly faster than the other due to uneven terrain, or internal pressure differences, causing debris bands to twist into elegant arcs that drift with the glacier's descent like a frozen dance. Season by season, glaciers accumulate stacked layers of ancient winters, each one holding traces of climatic conditions: dust from faraway storms, clearer ice from cold years, thicker layers from snowy seasons, forming a chronological archive that scientists read like a book of Earth's past. The presence of glaciers can also cool entire regions, as their massive surfaces reflect sunlight and release chilled air that flows into surrounding valleys, creating microclimates where plants and animals thrive at elevations different from those they inhabit elsewhere. This cooling influences wind patterns, humidity, and even cloud formation. And during warm periods, some glaciers darken as microscopic algae grow across the surface, tinting the ice in subtle shades of brown, green, or red. These organisms absorb more sunlight, increasing melt rates and demonstrating how even tiny life forms can influence the evolution of massive ice bodies. Across valleys, mountains, deserts, and polar expanses, glaciers continue to carve, collect, record, reflect, transport, and transform, acting as both sculptors and archives of Earth's long memory. Each grain of rock flour, each folded ice band, each glowing crevasse, and each slowly transported boulder adds to the vast story of ice, an ancient force that moves with the breath of time itself, reshaping land, storing history, and reminding us that even the slowest processes carry immense power as they shape the world across millennia. Life thrives even in the coldest and most remote corners of the planet, and nowhere is this more astonishing than on the surface of massive glaciers where tiny organisms flourish in pockets of meltwater that form during warmer periods of the day. These microscopic communities use sunlight to fuel their growth, and the pigments they produce can darken the surrounding ice, creating colors that range from subtle grayish tones to deep, vivid purples depending on the species present. This change in color causes the ice to absorb more sunlight than it would otherwise, increasing the rate at which the top layer melts, and as the meltwater flows downslope, the algae spread in fluid, shifting patterns that reflect the direction and intensity of the water's movement. Season after season, these microorganisms form streaks, clusters, and winding trails across the glacier, reminding us that even in the harshest environments life finds ways to adapt, survive, and shape its surroundings. Scientists study these algae not only to understand how biological processes influence melting rates but also to explore the remarkable adaptations that allow microorganisms to endure freezing temperatures, intense sunlight, and limited nutrients. In this way, the glacier becomes a living canvas etched with dynamic traces of life that flourish in one of Earth's most unforgiving habitats. Yet beneath this thin surface layer of biological activity lies another fascinating phenomenon. Some glaciers glide upon cushions of pressurized water trapped between the ice and the underlying bedrock. As meltwater accumulates deep below the glacier, intense pressure builds, creating a slippery, friction-reducing layer that enables the entire mass of ice to slide smoothly across the landscape. This hidden lubrication system dramatically alters the movement of the glacier. When more water flows through these subglacial channels during warm seasons, the glacier may surge forward at a slightly faster pace, whereas during colder seasons the water freezes or drains, causing the glacier's progression to slow. This shifting balance of water and ice forms a quiet yet powerful conveyor that guides glacial movement over centuries. Even when the surface appears completely still, stress builds inside the glacier as immense ice layers stretch, bend, and deform around obstacles or uneven terrain below. These internal tensions sometimes release suddenly, producing cracking sounds that echo across mountain valleys. The noises can be sharp and startling like splintering wood or deep and resonant like distant thunder rolling through the peaks. Temperature fluctuations, even small ones, often trigger these fractures as the ice expands when warmed by sunlit slopes or contracts in shaded, colder areas, creating sudden breaks that travel miles through the glacier's internal structure. Sensitive scientific instruments detect these vibrations and reveal the intricate patterns of internal movement that help researchers understand a glacier's evolving behavior. The cracks send ripples of sound outward into the surrounding wilderness, reminding us that the glacier, though silent from afar, is alive with motion, stress, and constant transformation driven by the ceaseless forces of nature. As glaciers grind across the terrain, they pulverize massive quantities of rock into fine sediment. Meltwater streams carry this eroded material away, and when the water slows in nearby valleys or plains, the heavier grains settle and accumulate. Over time, strong mountain winds lift and reshape these loose sediments into dunes that resemble desert sand formations but owe their origins to ice rather than heat. These dunes can grow large, shifting gradually over years or decades as wind patterns sculpt elegant ridges and sweeping curves. Their unique mineral composition reflects the specific rock types ground up by the glacier, offering geologists clues about the ancient paths carved by ice long since vanished. The dunes endure as lasting monuments to glacial activity, standing firm even centuries after the ice that created them retreats. Meanwhile, in alpine regions where glaciers occupy opposite sides of mountain ridges, the relentless erosion of rock from both valleys sharpens the ridge between them into a narrow, dramatic spine known as an arête. Over long periods, the ice on each side carves away the rock walls, thinning the ridge and producing jagged edges and sweeping crests that dominate the skyline. These arêtes mark the precise line where two glaciers once moved in parallel, sculpting the mountain into striking angular forms that remain long after the ice has disappeared. Glaciers also shape mountain peaks into iconic pyramidal forms known as horns, created when several glaciers surround and erode a summit from multiple directions. Each glacier carves out a basin, and where these basins intersect, the remaining rock is narrowed, sharpened, and uplifted into a towering point. Frost, wind, and ice continue sculpting the peak over millennia until its final shape pierces the sky as a symbol of the combined power of erosion from all sides. Along their journey, glaciers push forward massive loads of stones, soil, and debris scraped from the surrounding land. This material accumulates at their fronts in curved ridges known as moraines, which retain the shape of the glacier's former edge. Even after the glacier retreats, these ridges remain as sweeping arcs across the landscape, storing layers of sediment ranging from fine silt to boulders transported over great distances. By studying moraines, scientists reconstruct the glacier's size, movements, and history, often discovering evidence of ancient climates preserved within these deposits. As sunlight shines across the glacier's surface, countless crystals embedded within the ice scatter and refract the light, producing dazzling patterns that shift with every passing cloud. Wind-blown snow sparkles as it drifts over the ice, and meltwater pools act like mirrors reflecting blue skies or surrounding mountains, creating an ever-changing tapestry of light that reveals the complex layered structure of the glacier. Deep crevasses glow with shades of blue and white, illuminating the hidden interior of the ice where crystals grow slowly over centuries. Slight changes in weather, an increase in wind, a brief clearing in the clouds, or the shifting angle of the sun, transform the entire scene instantly, turning the glacier into a luminous landscape of shimmering reflections. The powerful movement of glaciers carves enormous U-shaped valleys from previously narrow river channels. Rivers typically form V-shaped valleys with steep sides and narrow floors, but once a glacier enters such a valley, its immense weight pushes outward and downward, broadening and deepening the valley far beyond anything water alone can achieve. Embedded rocks at the glacier's base grind against the bedrock, smoothing the walls and deepening the floor, and over thousands of years the valley becomes wide, flat, and open, framed by towering, gently curved slopes. Even long after the glacier melts away, these U-shaped valleys remain, often filled with lakes, forests, and meadows that flourish in the fertile soil deposited by the glacier. This reshaped terrain stands as a permanent record of glacial passage, a silent memory of the massive forces that once moved through the land. In addition to altering landscapes, glaciers also preserve ancient biological materials. Tiny grains of pollen carried by high-altitude winds settle onto glaciers during snowfall and become buried under successive layers of ice. Over centuries, these grains remain perfectly preserved, trapped alongside dust particles and bubbles of ancient air. By extracting and analyzing these microscopic fossils, scientists can reconstruct vegetation patterns, climate conditions, and wind paths from thousands of years ago. Some pollen originates from forests that have vanished or migrated due to climate changes, while other grains come from ecosystems that once thrived in distant regions. In this way, the glacier becomes a vast archive, storing delicate fragments of Earth's ecological history in frozen layers that stretch back across ages. When glaciers reach coastlines, they often extend into deep ocean inlets known as fjords. These steep, narrow channels were themselves carved by ancient glaciers, and today many are filled with vibrant marine life nourished by mineral-rich meltwater runoff. As the glacier's front meets the sea, towering blocks of ice break away and crash into the water, creating floating platforms that provide shelter for fish, seals, birds, and invertebrates. The meltwater stirs nutrients that feed plankton, which in turn supports entire food webs. Dolphins, whales, and seabirds gather in these waters to feed, transforming the fjord into a dynamic blend of ice and life. The glacier's presence shapes not only the landscape but also the ecology of the ocean, linking frozen mountain peaks to the rhythms of marine ecosystems. Through all these processes, biological growth, internal fracturing, sediment creation, mountain carving, valley widening, archival preservation, and ecological support, glaciers reveal themselves as more than simple masses of ice. They are dynamic, evolving forces of nature that shape continents, sustain life, preserve ancient histories, and turn sunlight into shimmering art across their frozen surfaces. Each crack, each ripple of water, each drifting grain of wind-shaped sand tells a story of how the slow, persistent movement of ice has sculpted the world we see today, reminding us that even the coldest regions of Earth are full of motion, memory, and hidden life. The cold meltwater from glaciers mixes with the salt water of the fjords it enters, creating layers of differing temperature and density that influence the circulation patterns within these deep inlets, establishing a dynamic marine environment shaped by the slow, steady presence of ice. Seals, birds, and whales are often drawn to these icy waters, following the nutrient-rich currents stirred by the melting glacier, creating a unique intersection of frozen and marine ecosystems where predator and prey, ice and ocean, interact continuously. Each subtle interaction between ice and water becomes part of a larger, interconnected system, linking the glacier's flow to the food webs and physical dynamics of the fjord. In some high-altitude regions, glaciers accumulate tremendous quantities of snow over centuries, which compresses under its own weight into broad, elevated plateaus of ice. Unlike typical glaciers that move rapidly down slopes, these enormous ice fields spread outward, forming smooth, expansive surfaces that rise above the surrounding terrain and serve as massive reservoirs feeding multiple glaciers that radiate from their edges. The immense weight of these plateaus compacts countless seasonal layers of snow into dense crystalline structures, which slowly deform under the strain of their own mass. Air currents around these elevated ice surfaces often become unique, spilling cold air into nearby valleys while strong winds sculpt intricate, constantly shifting patterns across the ice, giving the plateau a living, breathing character. The stability and longevity of such plateaus depend on the delicate interplay of snowfall, temperature, and long-term climatic cycles, and they function not only as frozen reservoirs but also as natural climate regulators, affecting conditions far below them while standing as enormous crowns atop the highest mountains. When glaciers retreat, they leave behind a variety of landforms, including kettle lakes formed by the melting of isolated blocks of ice buried beneath sediments. These remnants of glacial ice gradually shrink, leaving depressions that fill with water from rainfall, streams, or groundwater, creating lakes of diverse size, shape, and depth. Each kettle lake is unique, reflecting the random position of ice left behind, and over time, they develop habitats for plant and animal life, long persisting as markers of glacial history even after the ice has vanished. In addition, glaciers often carry and preserve layers of volcanic ash, trapped within the accumulating snow during eruptions. These ash layers appear as dark stripes embedded within the ice, marking specific events and periods of deposition. As the glacier flows and deforms, these ash bands bend, fold, and stretch, creating intricate records of the glacier's motion while preserving snapshots of volcanic history. Scientists study these frozen stripes to date eruptions, track atmospheric circulation, and understand how ash traveled vast distances before settling on ice-covered landscapes, linking geologic events with the slow, inexorable accumulation of glacial ice. Deep within the glacier, hidden networks of interlocking ice crystals form under extreme pressure and temperature conditions. These crystal lattices grow into complex patterns that differ from surface ice, reflecting the glacier's internal stress and flow. When crevasses or ice caves expose these structures, they shimmer with textures and colors that vary from fine-grained to large, faceted formations, catching light in mesmerizing ways. Scientists explore these crystalline networks to understand how ice responds to immense pressures, how its structure stores energy, and how frozen water behaves as both a rigid and dynamic material. Through these processes, glaciers function as natural laboratories of crystallography, shaped entirely by cold, time, and the immense weight of accumulated ice. Beyond their physical and geological impact, glaciers exert influence on global systems, particularly sea levels. As glaciers grow, they lock away vast amounts of water, lowering sea levels worldwide, and as they shrink, the previously stored water returns to the ocean, raising coastlines and altering currents. These glacial changes can expose or submerge land bridges, influencing migration patterns of animals and humans throughout history and affecting ecosystems across continents. Modern observations reveal that even slight variations in glacial mass have profound consequences for coastal communities, highlighting the direct connection between high mountain ice and distant oceans. On the glacier's surface, wind, meltwater, and gradual deformation produce ripple patterns and ridges that extend across vast expanses. These formations emerge from repeated airflow in consistent directions, the refreezing of thin meltwater sheets, or the gradual creep of ice under its own weight, creating textures that shift seasonally with snowfall or melting. The ripples record subtle environmental interactions, marking daily changes in temperature, wind strength, and water flow, offering researchers insight into the ongoing balance of forces acting upon the glacier. In rare cases, glaciers form within volcanic calderas, where the circular basins left by past eruptions collect and shelter deep accumulations of snow. The caldera walls protect the snow from strong winds, enabling it to compact into thick layers of ice that may slowly flow outward or inward depending on the basin's shape. These caldera glaciers create striking landscapes where ice and rock interact in unusual ways, with geothermal heat from volcanic activity sometimes influencing ice formation nearby, creating unique contrasts of cold and warmth. Studying these formations provides scientists with exceptional opportunities to observe the interaction of glacial dynamics with volcanic processes, capturing both heat-driven and pressure-driven changes within a single frozen system. In extremely cold and dry conditions, glaciers can even produce phenomena related to static electricity, as ice fragments break off and scrape across the surface, building up charge and occasionally creating sparks of static energy. These subtle electrical phenomena hint at the complex, interconnected forces at work within seemingly inert ice. As glaciers meet fjords or the open ocean, the cold fresh water they release forms layered systems within the saltwater, establishing stratification that influences circulation patterns, nutrient distribution, and the movements of fish, birds, and marine mammals. The melting glacier continues to nourish plankton, forming the base of elaborate marine food webs, while the ice itself provides shelter for larger creatures and contributes minerals that sustain ecological balance. By acting simultaneously as geological sculptor, climatic moderator, ecological architect, and historical archivist, glaciers demonstrate their profound influence across spatial and temporal scales, from minute microscopic algae on their surfaces to the largest scale changes in sea level and landform shaping. Each feature, from ripple patterns in kettle lakes to caldera glaciers and static charged ice fragments, reveals the glacier's constant dialogue with the world around it. Ice sculpts valleys into wide U-shaped corridors, carves jagged arêtes, sharpens alpine horns, and deposits moraines that trace the former extent of its reach, preserving evidence of movement across thousands of years. It carries volcanic ash that records geological events, pollen that archives ancient vegetation, and mineral sediments that shape distant dunes, linking mountain peaks to plains, fjords, and oceans in a continuous network of environmental interaction. Deep within, networks of crystalline ice encode the glacier's internal stresses and slow flows, while its surface and edges regulate local climate, directing winds, shading valleys, and maintaining habitats for plants and animals that rely on the cooler microclimate it produces. Over millennia, these combined effects create landscapes, climates, and ecosystems that are inseparable from the glacier's presence, and even after ice retreats, the marks it leaves behind, from ripple patterns to moraines, kettle lakes, and sharpened peaks, serve as enduring testimony to the immense power, subtle complexity, and living dynamics of these frozen giants. Glaciers are not merely frozen rivers of ice. They are living systems that record time, store energy, shape topography, influence oceans, and sustain life, offering scientists and observers a glimpse into Earth's intertwined geological, climatic, and ecological history, where every crack, ripple, and crystalline network tells a story of the forces that have molded the planet over eons, making glaciers both monuments and archives of nature's enduring creativity and power. In the extreme cold and dryness of polar regions, glaciers can produce subtle but astonishing phenomena as charged fragments of ice tumble, collide, or scrape against one another, building up static electricity that sometimes releases faint sparks dancing across the edges of brittle ice layers. These sparks, most visible when freshly exposed ice slides against older material after sudden cracking, briefly illuminate the frozen landscape with pale flashes of light, revealing the hidden electrical processes at work within seemingly inert ice. Scientists studying these sparks gain insight into the insulating properties of glacial ice and the behavior of electrical charge in frigid climates, demonstrating that frozen water can carry energy typically associated with storms or deserts. Beyond these ephemeral displays, glaciers harbor vast hollow chambers sculpted deep beneath their surface, where meltwater carves enormous caverns with polished walls, smooth arcs, and domed ceilings. Sound entering these spaces reverberates and amplifies in strange, ethereal ways, so even a single drop of water produces cascading echoes reminiscent of distant bells, while footsteps become magnified in surreal acoustic patterns. Constant freezing and thawing subtly reshape these chambers, and variations in air pressure inside the ice create ever-changing resonance, turning the glacier into a hidden amphitheater of natural sound. As glaciers slide over bedrock, stones embedded in the ice gouge long, parallel grooves into the surface, leaving behind stripes that record the glacier's path and the immense pressures it exerted over millennia. The depth, spacing, and orientation of these striations vary with the size of the embedded rocks and the speed of glacial movement, providing scientists with a permanent record of ancient ice flow and a way to reconstruct landscapes shaped by long-vanished glaciers. Remarkably, glaciers can also form in regions where heavy snowfall is absent. In these windswept areas, snow transported from distant terrain accumulates in sheltered basins and slowly compacts into ice, creating glaciers supported not by local precipitation but by steady, remote deposits. Once formed, these wind-fed glaciers begin a slow descent guided by gravity, bending and curving along irregular terrain to create elegant S-shaped flows. The internal structure of the ice preserves this path, with bands of sediment and compressed snow tracing the curves, showing how sensitive glacier movement is to slight variations in slope, pressure, and subglacial topography. Beneath their surfaces, meltwater channels often form hidden waterfalls, cascading through tunnels and chambers, shaping both the ice and underlying bedrock while producing deep, rhythmic tones that resonate through the frozen interior. These subterranean flows shift as the glacier migrates, revealing a dynamic interior world whose movement affects the glacier's speed, stability, and morphology. In the coastal or riverine outlets of glaciers, thin ice disks sometimes form pancake-like structures, spun and molded by the motion of cold, turbulent water, their edges gently rubbing together as they drift in clusters, creating quiet murmurs on the surface. These unusual formations demonstrate how glaciers extend their influence beyond solid ice, altering nearby waterways to produce rare physical phenomena. The surfaces of glaciers themselves undergo seasonal transformations, shifting color and texture in response to changes in sunlight, temperature, moisture, and biological activity. In winter, fresh snow blankets the ice, softening its appearance into pale powder. In spring, melting and refreezing produce smooth blue sheets, while summer brings patches of darker meltwater, dust, and even algal growth, imparting subtle greens, purples, or grays. With the return of cooler autumn temperatures, new snowfall brightens the glacier again, revealing a constantly shifting interplay between ice and atmosphere. Deep within, pressure compresses ice so densely that trapped air bubbles vanish, forming portions of stone-like ice that sink instead of float when calved into water, shimmering as light refracts through the compact crystals. These dense ice formations are the result of long-term compression under massive overlying snow loads, demonstrating the immense weight glaciers accumulate over time. Through all of these processes, electrical discharges, echoing chambers, striated bedrock, wind-fed accumulation, S-shaped curves, hidden waterfalls, pancake ice, seasonal color shifts, and dense, sinking ice, glaciers emerge as active, responsive systems, far from static or lifeless. They simultaneously record geological history, influence local and regional hydrology, sculpt landforms, and interact with the atmosphere, oceans, and living organisms. Every movement of ice carries the imprint of the underlying topography and reflects subtle environmental conditions, while the patterns, textures, and internal structures encode centuries or millennia of change. In this way, glaciers serve not only as agents of erosion and deposition but also as dynamic archives of Earth's past, storing information about climate, vegetation, volcanic activity, and atmospheric circulation. They shape valleys into broad U-shaped corridors, carve jagged arêtes and alpine horns, deposit moraines and drumlins, and create kettle lakes, ripple patterns, and caldera glaciers, forming landscapes that persist long after the ice has retreated. Meltwater from glaciers feeds rivers and fjords, affecting marine ecosystems by distributing nutrients, supporting fish, birds, and marine mammals, and creating unique habitats where freshwater and saltwater meet. The pressure and flow of ice influence glaciers' ability to glide, bend, and navigate complex terrain, while the weight of accumulated snow transforms surfaces into plateaus and ice fields that moderate local climates, direct winds, and regulate downstream water supplies. Even microscopic features, such as algal growth or trapped pollen, record ecological and climatic information, revealing life and atmospheric conditions in regions otherwise inhospitable to human observation. Glaciers, therefore, function as living laboratories, recording energy transfer, crystal formation, and the mechanics of ice flow, while simultaneously shaping the physical world, influencing sea levels, and sustaining biological communities. They are simultaneously fragile and powerful, sensitive to minor changes in temperature, snowfall, and pressure, yet capable of sculpting mountains, valleys, and coastlines over eons. The interplay of visible and hidden processes, surface melting, subglacial streams, crevasse formation, internal crystal networks, electrical discharge, acoustic resonance, sediment transport, and ecological interaction, creates an intricate web of dynamic activity. Through this ongoing, multifaceted behavior, glaciers illustrate the interconnectedness of Earth's systems. Ice links mountains to oceans, snow to wind, fresh water to salt water, and geological forces to living ecosystems. They are archives of deep time, engines of landscape transformation, regulators of water and climate, and catalysts for ecological productivity. Their surfaces and interiors reveal patterns of motion, pressure, and energy invisible to casual observation, while the traces they leave behind, striations, moraines, kettle lakes, ripple patterns, caldera glaciers, and ice-formed waterfalls, provide tangible evidence of processes that occur over centuries and millennia. Even small sparks of static electricity, ephemeral as they are, hint at the complexity of forces at work in frozen environments, linking the microphysical interactions of ice to the grand, visible transformations of landscapes. Seasonal color changes, the formation of dense sinking ice, and the sculpting of hidden caverns all underscore the glacier's responsiveness to both environmental inputs and internal dynamics. Each glacier is thus a multifaceted system, simultaneously a recorder of history, a shaper of land, an architect of ecosystems, a monitor of climate, and a laboratory for understanding the physics of ice, water, and energy. Their existence demonstrates the remarkable interplay between fragility and power, stillness and motion, and surface phenomena and hidden processes. Through slow yet persistent movement, glaciers continually shape, preserve, and influenced the Earth, leaving behind enduring evidence of their presence and profound effects on the planet's geological, hydrological, and ecological systems. In essence, glaciers are living, evolving entities, whose subtle and dramatic activities, from faint sparks and echoing chambers to striated rock and submerged dense ice, connect the minute with the monumental, the visible with the hidden, and the present with deep time, making them indispensable in understanding the complexity, history, and ongoing evolution of the Earth. The presence of thick, ancient ice in a glacier tells scientists much about how frozen water can behave under immense pressure and over long periods, creating material that looks ordinary at first glance yet holds properties very different from surface ice. And this understanding expands when observing how glaciers produce meltwater that glows vivid turquoise as it emerges from the ice. Carrying microscopic particles of rock flour ground down by the glacier's steady movement, these tiny particles remain suspended, scattering sunlight so that shorter blue wavelengths dominate, giving streams, rivers, and lakes a luminous, almost surreal appearance. And this turquoise glow becomes a signature of glacial activity, a visible reminder of the ice's ongoing influence on the surrounding landscape. In polar regions, glaciers can stretch across hundreds of miles, flowing from high interior plateaus down through valleys, plains, and buried mountain ranges, forming sprawling systems whose surfaces, though seemingly uniform from above, reveal a complex internal rhythm shaped by snowfall, terrain, and ice pressure, with deep interior layers laid down centuries ago and edges that are continuously modified by movement, melting, and refreezing, illustrating the glacier's dynamic response to seasonal and climatic variation. Some glaciers survive entire climate cycles, shrinking during warm phases yet persisting over millennia due to the interplay of snow accumulation, shade, temperature, and local geography, such as protective high mountain walls or cold wind corridors that deliver additional snow. These resilient ice masses preserve layered records of environmental change, including volcanic eruptions, dust storms, and atmospheric shifts, and by studying them, scientists can trace climatic trends across time, scales far beyond human observation. The movement of glaciers over solid rock produces glacial pavements, where embedded stones grind surfaces flat, leaving behind polished expanses marked by microscopic scratches aligned with the ice flow, while larger grooves trace the paths of bigger stones dragged across the bedrock. These surfaces serve as permanent evidence of the glacier's force and direction, allowing researchers to reconstruct ancient glacial paths and understand how ice has sculpted terrain, while also demonstrating the glacier's ability to reshape landscapes over centuries. Meltwater emerging from glaciers forms braided river networks as sediment-laden flows spread into open valleys, deposit heavy particles, and divide into multiple channels that weave and rejoin continually, creating dynamic ecosystems where plants and animals adapt to fluctuating water levels, while the rivers themselves reflect the glacier's ongoing influence far from the ice. Deep within thick glacial systems, enormous frozen reservoirs store water in dense, compacted layers, preserving moisture from countless winters and releasing it slowly to feed streams, lakes, and rivers that depend on this steady supply. These reservoirs, hidden and silent, regulate regional water cycles, while scientists monitor their volume and melting rates to predict future water availability in changing climates. On steep or unstable slopes, glaciers can collapse in dramatic cascades of towering ice blocks, where internal stress exceeds the ice's ability to deform, producing thunderous crashes that reshape the glacier front and reveal fresh layers that will begin their slow descent, triggered by temperature fluctuations, meltwater buildup, or changes in weight distribution. The resulting fractured fields record the moment of failure and are studied to understand glacier stability and anticipate future collapses. Large glaciers influence local weather by reflecting sunlight, cooling air above their surfaces, and directing dense cold air into valleys, displacing warmer air and triggering fog, snow, or wind shifts, effectively functioning as natural climate engines that shape microclimates, impacting plants, animals, and ecosystems in their vicinity. Glaciers can trap microscopic life in suspended animation, enclosing organisms in layers of ice where biological activity nearly halts due to extreme cold, limited oxygen, and nutrient scarcity, preserving them for long periods until the glacier melts or shifts and releases them, allowing the study of life's adaptation to extreme conditions and providing clues about early Earth life as well as potential survival of organisms on icy worlds elsewhere in the solar system. In steep, heavily fractured regions, glaciers form jagged crests called seracs, where deep crevasses intersect as the ice moves over abrupt slope changes, creating towering chaotic structures whose constant movement and occasional collapse demonstrate both the glacier's power and fragility. Glacial ice can create meltwater streams that carve tunnels, chambers, and underground waterfalls beneath the surface, sculpting ice and bedrock while producing resonant echoes and rhythmic sounds as water cascades through confined spaces, illustrating a hidden dynamic system that shapes both the physical and acoustic environment within the glacier. Glacier surfaces display ripple patterns formed by wind, meltwater flow, and ice deformation, capturing interactions between air, water, and ice on scales fine enough to reveal subtle environmental changes, while pancake ice formations in turbulent meltwater reveal how glaciers influence nearby waterways by providing the right conditions for rare ice structures to form. The seasonal color of glaciers shifts dramatically, from pale winter snow to smooth blue spring ice, to darker meltwater-stained surfaces in summer, sometimes accented with algae or dust, and brightening again in autumn, revealing the glacier's constant interaction with the atmosphere and sensitivity to light, temperature, and moisture, making its surface a living indicator of environmental conditions. Dense glacier ice at great depths, compressed by overlying layers, loses almost all air bubbles and becomes heavy enough to sink when calved into water, demonstrating the profound effect of pressure on ice properties, while ancient ice layers preserve detailed records of past climates, atmospheric conditions, and even volcanic events, linking natural phenomena across vast distances and time scales. Turbulent glaciers in fjords, rivers, and coastal areas influence marine and freshwater ecosystems, shaping nutrient distribution and creating habitats that support fish, birds, and marine mammals, while contributing to the formation of lakes, kettle ponds, and braided rivers, extending their impact far beyond the ice itself. Some glaciers grow in unexpected ways, fed by wind-transported snow in arid regions, demonstrating the ice's ability to form under unusual circumstances, while curving S-shaped flows and movement over irregular terrain highlight its responsiveness to topography and pressure variations, preserving the paths of valleys and mountains in subtle patterns of sediment, ice layering, and crevasse orientation. Glaciers can store and release energy in the form of electrical sparks generated by the friction of ice fragments moving against one another, revealing microphysical processes within a frozen landscape usually associated with storms and dry regions, while deep crystal networks and interlocking ice structures provide insight into how ice behaves under pressure, stores mechanical energy, and adapts to slow movements over millennia. The formation of kettle lakes and glacial plateaus demonstrates glaciers' ability to shape the landscape through accumulation, melting, and retreat, creating habitats and reservoirs that persist long after ice has receded, while volcanic ash trapped within layers records distant eruptions, allowing scientists to trace connections between fire from deep within the earth and frozen ice on distant mountains. The cumulative effect of glaciers on sea levels is profound. Growing glaciers store water that would otherwise enter oceans, lowering sea levels, while melting glaciers release water, raising oceans and reshaping coastlines, altering currents, migration routes, and ecosystems worldwide. Surface patterns such as ripples, ridges, and troughs formed by wind, melting, and ice deformation offer a visible record of immediate environmental conditions, while hidden waterfalls, crevasses, echoing chambers, and pancake ice demonstrate the glacier's hidden dynamism and influence on surrounding water systems. Through all of these features, color shifts, dense ice, turquoise meltwater, massive ice sheets, collapsed seracs, microbe preservation, acoustic chambers, ripple patterns, crevasse networks, and braided rivers, glaciers function as multifaceted, living systems that continuously interact with the atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, and biosphere, serving as archives of geological and climatic history. Regulators of water and climate, sculptors of landforms, and habitats for life. Their surfaces, interiors, and the traces they leave behind provide an enduring record of Earth's history, illustrating how frozen water, over centuries and millennia, connects microphysical processes with global-scale transformations, shaping landscapes, ecosystems, and climate while preserving the evidence of environmental change for generations to come, making glaciers indispensable in understanding the complexity, resilience, and dynamic nature of our planet's systems. The remaining columns of ice and glaciers stand as irregular towers separated by narrow gaps, their sides shaped and sculpted by wind, meltwater, and the relentless movement of the ice, creating jagged silhouettes that shift constantly as the glacier flows, reminding observers of the dynamic and unpredictable nature of frozen landscapes, and revealing areas under intense stress where ice is stretched, fractured, and forced to adjust to rugged terrain. Even where surfaces appear still, glaciers can slowly march across tundra landscapes, advancing over relatively flat ground covered with mosses, shrubs, and frozen soil, pushing vegetation aside, burying it beneath their weight, and altering the underlying permafrost to affect soil temperature and moisture patterns, gradually reshaping shallow depressions, ridges, drainage channels, and habitats for wildlife that must adapt to the glacier's slow but relentless advance. As glaciers move, they carry layers of sediment and debris that become compressed into ice, forming distinct dark and light stripes, sometimes from volcanic ash, dust storms, or rock fragments, that record the glacier's internal motion and layered history, stretching and bending in graceful arcs visible where crevasses or exposed cliffs appear, providing scientists with insights into sediment transport, ice flow, and environmental conditions over time, while the glacier itself buries entire landscapes beneath thick ice, swallowing valleys, forests, rivers, and hills, transforming the land beneath and leaving a record of erosion, compacted soils, new drainage patterns, and sometimes lakes long after it retreats. The movement of glaciers is rarely silent, grinding against bedrock, shifting under immense pressure, and directing meltwater beneath the ice generates subtle vibrations and tremors detectable with instruments that reveal hidden cavities, regions of fast flow, and changes in subglacial pressure, turning glaciers into quiet seismic sources that mark their presence far beyond the visible ice. Some glaciers accumulate vast amounts of snow and ice in central regions, forming massive rounded domes that feed ice outward in all directions, with interior layers compressed into some of the densest ice on Earth, while the surrounding weather and wind patterns are influenced by these towering structures, creating microclimates and directing cold air down valley systems, demonstrating how glaciers act as engines that drive entire ice systems and shape surrounding terrain. As glaciers advance and retreat, they deposit long ridges of sediment known as moraines, marking their former boundaries and preserving a record of transported rocks, soil, and stones, often forming rolling hills as vegetation establishes itself on these deposits over time, offering a lasting map of glacial movement. The relentless grinding, plucking, and deposition performed by glaciers sculpt valleys, deepen basins, sharpen cliffs, create lakes, and leave plateaus where thick ice press down on the land, while isolated rocks carried from distant sources reveal the ice's transport capabilities, and the combination of erosion and deposition forms landscapes that endure for thousands of years, bearing silent witness to the paths glaciers once carved across the terrain. In certain regions, glaciers spread into wide fans when they exit narrow valleys into flatter plains, thinning as they advance and forming gentle slopes with surface features that radiate outward from valley mouths, while meltwater streams branch in widening arcs, distributing sediment and further shaping the land. These fan-shaped glaciers illustrate how ice responds when confinement disappears, revealing underlying terrain and the glacier's transition from steep highlands to open lowlands, while simultaneously recording its own internal flow patterns and compressed layers, sediment bands, and crevasse orientation. Within the glacier, irregular ice towers called seracs rise in chaotic formations where steep slopes and fractured ice intersect, constantly shifting and collapsing in response to deformation, their jagged shapes a visible sign of stress and movement, while deep inside, glaciers carry enormous ice masses that, under immense pressure, form dense, compact layers capable of sinking when calved into water, and preserve ancient ice that holds records of climate cycles, volcanic eruptions, dust deposition, and other environmental shifts. Meltwater from glaciers sculpts tunnels, chambers, and underground waterfalls, producing resonant sounds, carving ice and bedrock, and creating hidden acoustic environments that echo drops of water like distant bells, while streams carry rock flour that scatters sunlight into turquoise glows, coloring lakes and rivers, marking the glacier's influence far from the ice itself. Seasonal changes alter the surface color, texture, and appearance of glaciers, from pale winter snow to bright blue spring ice to darker, meltwater-stained summer surfaces, sometimes accented with algae or dust, and brightening again with autumn snow, illustrating the glacier's interaction with the atmosphere and its sensitivity to light, temperature, and moisture, while dense interior ice preserves ancient conditions, traps microscopic life in suspended animation, and becomes a vault storing biological, chemical, and geological information over centuries or millennia. Glaciers also influence local and regional climate, reflecting sunlight, cooling air above their surfaces, displacing warmer air, and triggering fog, snow, and wind changes, functioning as natural climate engines, while their surfaces ripple and deform in response to wind, meltwater flow, and ice deformation, recording subtle environmental shifts, and producing patterns visible in crevasses, moraines, and sediment bands that allow researchers to track ice flow, climatic changes, and landscape evolution. Glaciers create hidden waterfalls and icefall cascades, shaping channels in ice and bedrock while producing deep rhythmic tones as water moves through enclosed spaces. And when massive blocks collapse or calve, they reshape the glacier front and generate dramatic ice fields, revealing fresh layers that continue to flow slowly over time. Wind-fed glaciers demonstrate the ability of ice to grow in regions with minimal local snowfall, relying on the transport of snow from distant sources to accumulate and compress into ice over centuries, forming glaciers that advance in S-shaped curves around irregular terrain, recording these paths in bands of sediment and compressed ice. While pancake ice formations in turbulent meltwater demonstrate how glaciers influence surrounding water systems by cooling and shaping rare ice structures. Across polar regions and high mountains, glaciers can extend hundreds of miles, forming immense ice sheets whose thickness varies from interior to edges, holding layered records of snowfall, volcanic ash, dust storms, and atmospheric changes, while responding to seasonal, climatic, and topographic variations, preserving evidence of past environments and contributing to global sea level changes as they grow or melt. The glacier's relentless movement across bedrock leaves polished pavements and long grooves, evidence of the tremendous forces at work, while their advance and retreat create dynamic systems of braided rivers, moraines, kettle lakes, and sediment fans that influence vegetation, ecosystems, and water distribution far from the ice, providing essential habitats and regulating regional hydrology. Their capacity to survive climate cycles, collapse in cascades, trap microscopic life, generate local weather, and preserve dense ice that sinks into water demonstrates the glacier's multifaceted nature as both a sculptor of the land and an archive of environmental history, while their surfaces, interiors, and the traces they leave behind serve as enduring indicators of the interconnectedness of ice, water, rock, life, and climate, revealing a frozen system that continuously adapts, preserves, and reshapes the Earth over centuries and millennia, leaving behind a landscape etched with their paths, layered with their sediment, and illuminated by the subtle glows of meltwater streams that continue to testify to the hidden energy, movement, and transformative power of glaciers in the natural world. There are glaciers that crack apart in glittering showers, where surface layers of ice fracture into countless small pieces that scatter light like broken crystal, a phenomenon that occurs when brittle ice expands or contracts rapidly due to sudden temperature changes, producing tiny shards that tumble or slide down the glacier's surface, catching sunlight as they move and creating moments of intense sparkle that shimmer across the frozen slope, each small crack representing a larger pattern of stress release within the ice and revealing the glacier's sensitivity to subtle environmental changes, adding a dynamic visual beauty that underscores the constant adjustments occurring in its upper layers, while elsewhere glaciers move in secret beneath thick blankets of snow, where heavy annual snowfall hides crevasses, ridges, and meltwater streams flowing beneath a smooth white surface, yet the glacier continues its steady advance, carrying forward layers of ice, embedded debris, and mineral deposits, gently shifting the snow above to form subtle waves and depressions that trace the hidden motion below, a world uncovered only by ground-penetrating radar that reveals a network of moving ice and flowing water beneath the seemingly calm exterior, as the glacier silently shapes the land beneath, leaving behind transformed valleys, sculpted soils, and redefined drainage patterns, while above, its surface appears serene and undisturbed, masking the immense forces at work below. Glaciers can carry massive boulders over incredible distances, picking up rocks from cliffs, valleys, and mountain slopes, embedding them within the ice, or allowing them to ride atop the surface, only to deposit these stones, known as glacial erratics, far from their original locations when the glacier melts or retreats, leaving these far-traveled boulders scattered across plains, perched on ridges, or resting in meadows where no similar rocks exist, each one telling the story of the glacier's reach, the power of its flow, and the incredible persistence required to transport such enormous objects, serving as silent markers of the ice's historical path that endure for centuries, long after the glacier itself has vanished, and speaking to the vast temporal scale on which these frozen systems operate. These icy giants move slowly, yet they carry immense stories. They shape mountains, guide rivers, cradle ancient winters, and hold memories older than any written record, with their patient, grain-by-grain movements shifting layer upon layer in the deep calm of the natural world, forming hidden chambers, echoing caverns, and secret meltwater falls whose soft sounds resonate through sculpted ice, producing quiet music that drifts through frozen valleys and is perceptible only to the attentive observer or the sensitive instrument. Glaciers leave behind polished bedrock, grooved pavements, and moraines composed of transported soil and stones, evidence of the grinding and plucking that reshapes landscapes over millennia, while sediment layers compressed into ice-formed stripes, preserving histories of volcanic ash, dust storms, and ancient debris, all bending and stretching as the ice flows, creating a visible record of internal motion, while the ice itself, under immense pressure, forms dense, deep layers that can sink when calved into water, capturing and preserving evidence of climate cycles, environmental changes, and even microscopic life in suspended animation, which, when released as the ice melts, provides insight into the resilience of organisms and the long-term adaptability of life in extreme conditions, revealing the glacier as a vault not only of geological history but of biological history as well. The frozen streams and meltwater rivers emerging from glaciers carry fine rock flour that scatters sunlight to produce brilliant turquoise glows in lakes and rivers, coloring the surrounding landscape and marking the glacier's influence far beyond the ice itself, while seasonal changes alter the glacier's surface from pale winter snow to bright blue spring ice to darker, meltwater-stained summer surfaces, sometimes punctuated by algae or dust, brightening again with autumn snowfall, reflecting the constant interaction between ice and atmosphere and demonstrating the glacier's sensitivity to light, temperature, and moisture. Wind-fed glaciers can form even in regions with minimal local snowfall, relying on transported snow from distant areas to accumulate over centuries, forming ice that moves in graceful curves or S-shaped paths around irregular terrain, recording these trajectories in bands of compressed ice and sediment, while pancake ice may form in turbulent meltwater, illustrating how glaciers influence nearby water systems by cooling and shaping the growth of rare ice formations. In polar regions and high mountains, glaciers can extend hundreds of miles, forming sprawling ice sheets whose thickness varies from deep interior sections to thinner edges, preserving layers of snow, volcanic ash, dust, and atmospheric traces accumulated over millennia, while responding to seasonal, climatic, and topographical changes and influencing river systems, ecosystems, and even local weather patterns. As reflected sunlight, dense cold air, and moisture displacement trigger fog, snow, and wind variations that affect surrounding flora and fauna. Glaciers create hidden waterfalls and cascades beneath their surfaces, shaping channels in ice and bedrock, resonating with deep rhythmic tones, while massive ice blocks occasionally collapse in thunderous events that reshape the glacier front and expose fresh ice layers, continuing their slow journey, and leaving behind fractured fields of ice that record the moment of failure, offering scientists clues to glacial stability, internal stress, and the mechanisms of ice flow. Massive domes of ice form in central accumulation zones, feeding ice outward in all directions, where the center experiences extreme compression, creating some of the densest ice on Earth, while influencing local winds and weather patterns, functioning as engines that drive entire glacial systems and distributing ice across hundreds of miles, standing as monumental structures shaped entirely by snowfall, time, and the slow work of gravity. The grinding, plucking, and deposition performed by glaciers sculpt enduring landforms. Valleys are deepened, cliffs sharpen,